Hey guys, your boy Diablo TV. Make sure you subscribe, hit like, so I'll keep making these videos for you. And what I'd like to talk to you today about is, you see a lot of my videos I'm talking about wrestling, or I'm using professional wrestling style or wrestling promos as applied to other endeavors apart from wrestling. So the liberation of the pro wrestling promo from wrestling and applied to other situations of life is part of what I'm doing, and I'll make another video on that sometime, I suppose. But what I'd like to talk about is the destruction of the wrestling business. Now, I'm a wrestling fan, pro wrestling, professional wrestling, fanatic. Although, yeah, I do real wrestling, submission, jiu-jitsu, MMA, doing all different catch wrestling. I'm doing all kind of street fighting and reality-based combat sports martial arts since day one. But I've also been into pro wrestling since the 70s, since I'm a kid. My abuelo, my grandfather, abuelo Frank, rest in peace, and my uncle, since I'm a baby and everything like that. Over there, not too far from the Freedom Tower in Miami, by the Omni and everything like that. They'll be watching wrestling all the time, especially on Saturdays and everything like that. And he would, my grandfather would get up next to the TV and he'd be laughing hard the whole time. We didn't really talk about it too much. And then my uncle, we'd be all watching it. And he's doing all the moves on me and everything like that. So I grew up, and then in turn I did that to my little brother and everything. So I was always pretty fanatical about pro wrestling since day one. I think the very first thing I was ever into was monsters. And I could already draw like Frankenstein and Dracula already by first grade, and I was going to the book fairs and get all the books of monsters. And then when I first got the opportunity to buy magazines as a kid, maybe 5 years old, the first kind of magazines I started buying was wrestling magazines. Dusty Rhodes, Pro Wrestling Illustrated said Dusty Rhodes on the cover all bloody, and Abdullah the Butcher, stabbing each other. And I suppose there was black and white. Some of the magazines were black and white type print as well, and that gives it a real horrific quality. It's black, it's black blood. And so it was pretty terrifying. It was pretty horrific, and I realized that how blessed we were. I'm 44 now. I'm born in 1974, so growing up in South Florida in the 70s as a little kid, and then into the 80s. We're really fortunate in terms of what we had wrestling-wise. Now I see that people who have gone back, because the new wrestling, it's not as good as it used to be. I don't want to criticize those guys too much. They work hard and they do a good job. Vince McMahon, you got to give him credit. I don't really like all the things that they've done. Kind of kill the industry in other ways and everything like that. But he took his dad's promotion and his territory and made it supreme. And you got to give him credit. They said, and everybody says the best company to work for, called the company. So. WWF was one territory. If you go back to the territory system, and I'm all about going back to the territory system with everything I'm trying to do. But we all know that New England, that was WWF, Vince McMahon Sr., so Vince McMahon, then he turned into WWF, which became WWE, and that was one territory. So we got that in South Florida, and as I recall, that was mainly Saturday night's main event and stuff like that. That was Saturday nights. But then that was on regular TV, like NBC. In the old days, those kind of those kind of old dials. We used to have the regular channels 2, then NBC, ABC, CBS, and I believe it was on NBC. So that was on regular television. And that was the only wrestling show that was on regular television. Then we had the UHF. We had channel 33 and channel 39. And they had Kung Fu Theater and Samurai Sunday on all day on Sundays and Saturday, and they had a lot of wrestling too. So we got Florida Championship Wrestling, Georgia Championship Wrestling. To me, now I see it, that's the best. Gordon Soley, that's the best. And then besides that, World Class Championship Wrestling, Texas, Von Erichs, Freebirds, the Playboy, Gay Hart, all that. Of course, we got the WWF already mentioned. We had North Carolina, Atlanta. We didn't really get to Memphis, and we didn't really get to AWA, so we didn't get everything. We had Glow, of course, I used to like Glow. But we had pretty much a great cross-section of all the wrestling that was going on, with NWA wrestling especially. So I grew up, I'm very fortunate to say I grew up watching, as early as I can remember, American Dream, Dusty Rhodes, Nature Boy Ric Flair, Big Chief Wahoo McDaniel, Magnum TA, Road Warriors, Rock and Roll Express. So, that's what I grew up watching. I was super into NWA wrestling. We didn't really like WWF as much, but I did like some of those guys. I liked Nikolai Volkov, Iron Sheik, and I also like Barry Windham, Mike Rotundo, So, taking it from that time period, then I was in 5th grade, I think, when Hogan got the belt from Iron Sheik. The whole Wrestlemania thing happened. And so it's wrestling in my lifetime, when I'm born in 1974, You know, from the time I'm 5 years old, 6 years old, and then it's getting into, as I'm getting a little older, man, it's getting even bigger to fifth grade, like 1984. I'm fifth grade, 1984. I'm 10 years old, 1984. You know, it was huge. It was the biggest thing. Everybody's into it. And then it's like Wrestlemania, and it just got so big, and it kept getting bigger. But in the meantime, you know, NWA wrestling was awesome, which eventually became WCW. But over there, you had, that was like where it was at. Road Warriors, Ric Flair, Sid Vicious. You know, I could go on and on. Vader. You know, Steiner Brothers. It was awesome. You know, I loved it. And as time went on, you know, I really never thought I could be into it because those dudes were all pretty much huge and everything like that. And then as time went on, through the martial arts and everything, I was always on the cutting edge of combat sports and martial arts. So I was already into Vale Tudo and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, like pre-UFC. I was doing, you know, studying Jeet Kune Do and everything like that. And through all that, of course, I became aware of the Jeet Kune Do family. They roll with Shuto, Satoru Sayama. So Shuto organization, as you know, is an OG shoot-style wrestling, shoot fighting from Japan. So I was aware, not through the pro wrestling, but rather through the martial arts and the combat sports and the Vale Tudo and everything. I was aware of shoot-style wrestling, which, you know, then Pancrase came out, and that was the highest level of it, let's say. And then as time went on, then you started getting, then ECW came out. Really, that was the difference. And I had seen some Lucha Libre, but really, I hadn't seen that much. I had mainly seen when I was a kid, like Mil Mascaras. I used to see him in NWA. He became champion and everything like that. So that was one of the main Lucha Libre personalities I knew. I knew Santo was and Blue Demon, but I didn't really see them. I would see them more like in movies sometimes. So as time went on, then once ECW came out really, and then Paul Heyman, then he started bringing in all these guys like Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit, the Mexicans, Rey Mysterio, Juventud Guerra. I started bringing all these dudes in. And then I started seeing all these luchadors and Japanese wrestlers and everything like that. So they said, man, these dudes are smaller than me, and I'm more jacked up than everything like that. And then I started seeing that, you know, and ECW was awesome, you know. So they had the hardcore, which I thought that was pretty cool, although it's not my cup of tea. But seeing all these other more dynamic, more acrobatic, faster professional wrestlers with more moves, more technical. You know, just like you suppose with the lighter weight classes in boxing and MMA, as opposed to heavyweight, it's just like that. You know, it's more dynamic, more interesting a lot of time, the lighter weight fighters. So then I started being like, well, I want to do this. I have a martial arts background already, and I already know how to do shoot wrestling. So, you know, eventually I found out there was a school, Rusty Brooks. That's my teacher. That's who I'm not the best student because, unless I wasn't the best student, you know, respect to Rusty Brooks, man. I give him maximum respect. He's produced a lot of pro wrestlers, and I'm proud that I'm under his lineage because he was trained himself by Boris Malenko and Ox Baker. So then that's my lineage as well. So, you know, Rusty Brooks, man, he got the old knowledge of the professional wrestling business. And it's just like me when I was a little kid. I didn't believe in the forms. You know, even though I did good at them, I guess that's a little bit of the difference with the pro wrestling. I didn't really believe in the things he was teaching me in terms of what you call the psychology and telling a story about professional wrestling. And now, in retrospect, he was telling me back then that I didn't believe him. And I see how frustrating it must have been as a teacher. Because I came in with all the natural gifts, and I already you know, had a martial arts background. I was fearless and everything. So I was copying what I'm seeing on TV and thinking basically what he's teaching me is old-fashioned. Because I'd be doing stuff like fouling in the match, doing, you know, more scrimmaging when we were sparring. A lot of people don't even understand pro wrestling. People think pro wrestling is choreographed. It's not. I'm not saying some people don't do choreographed matches, but you can tell if you know what you're looking at, and that's weak. That's not real pro wrestling. Real pro wrestling is ad-lib, and you spar with it. The moves are designed that you don't hurt each other, but you counter each other's maneuvers and so forth, and you don't have to call moves, and you don't have to listen to what the other dude does. Somebody slams you and they call an elbow, you can move out of the way. You just got to know what the finish is. But when you're scrimmaging and training, in pro wrestling, there's no finish. You're just wrestling, working. So one move counters another. And then, you know, he'd be going into all chain wrestling and stuff, and I'm using fouls and up, and, hey, the match is over. I'm like, what you mean? And, you know, we're there in the backyard. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, man, he's like, you fouled the guy right in front of the referee. I'm like, so what? They do it all the time on TV. He says, Derek, just because they do it on TV doesn't make it right. And now I see why. I thought he was just holding me back and stuff and just was old-fashioned. But in the process of making it more, with all the big high spots and making it more acrobatic and letting heels win, then you destroy the psychology of it. And this was a business that had been successful for so long and reached such heights. And then there's the New Jersey Athletic Commission thing with Vince McMahon admitting that it's fake and that it's all sports entertainment. Yeah, did everybody know it's fake? Yeah, but it not like now. Not like now that everybody thinks pro wrestling is just a big joke and it's for little kids and stuff. Then you got a hardcore group of people that's trying to keep it alive. Respect to Billy Corgan for buying NWA. And these guys, Cody and everything that's keeping it going and everything like that. And the Sheik and people like that. You know, it's cool, but it's almost like punk rock. It's like underground. It's never going to be on the level. Keeping the other wrestling, Ring of Honor, respect to those dudes and stuff. I don't watch it. Impact Wrestling, you know what I mean? It's a different era. They're trying to keep that stuff going, and it's a different era. And the wrestling business, yeah, they destroyed it by letting heels and Stone Cold win. I love that. I was part of it. By letting Stone Cold get over all the time and stuff like that, ruining the babyface heel notion, and then all the hardcore and the excessive high spots and and then making it such a joke and making the television show that shows behind the scenes that it's all phony, you know. So it's like Jim Cornette said, he's one of the most brilliant minds in the professional wrestling history, and to this day he is with his commentary stuff. He said you can't put the toothpaste back in the bottle. People all know it's phony. So this is where I come in to save the wrestling business, because my teacher, what he taught me about was luthers and the old days and hooking and shooting. And since I already had the background of submission wrestling, he was able to teach me shooting and hooking because I already had the fundamentals of it anyway, different than these other students that didn't really have a submission background. So he was able to teach me hooking and shooting, and he was also able to teach me about the original carnival days and so forth, and about the psychology. And the thing about it is, I didn't listen back then to a lot of it, because how could I? WCW was massive, ECW, but what I was trying to do, shoot style wrestling back then, and I was pushing it back then, it's like, it was competing with all this other stuff. It was competing with the emerging MMA, it was competing with pro wrestling, but now, UFC is down, WWE is down, shoot style wrestling, taking it back to 1948, Carl Gott style, who's really the best wrestler? Sure, we could have an exhibition, but in the old days, those guys, what you're talking about, going back into the turn of the century and beyond, in the old days when Ed the Strangler Lewis, talking about guys like George Hackenschmidt, they meet up, when they're going to wrestle each other, they meet up first in the YMCA alone, and they wrestle on their own, real, and see who's better. Okay, now that we know who's who, they don't reveal it to the public. Now we can go do a tour, and you'll win this night, and I'll win that night. So it's supposed to be the people who have the belts is because they really know how to wrestle. And if you look at the old NWA, you look at the old Florida Championship Wrestling, old Gordon Solie, and we got this young man with a strong amateur background out of the University of Oklahoma. It's like everybody had an amateur background. Now I see that wrestling in that old days, it's much more realistic. It's just a little more boring. But that's where the psychology comes. Those Dory Funk and them type of classic, the Briscoe guys, they don't do that much moves and stuff like that. It's all psychology, brother. And that is never going to happen again using the current state of pro wrestling and the art and the theatrics that they have, and with respect to that, I'd love to work for them on my own terms, talking about the company, Vince and everything, but I don't know that we would see eye to eye, because I want to take it back to basics. I don't need a bunch of fancy equipment. You give me a ring, you give me an interview era. Same like GCW, same like Florida Championship Wrestling. That's all I need, baby. And I'll bring the athletes, and we'll go back to the sport of wrestling and avoid gimmicks like what Carl Gott said. So, the destruction of the wrestling business has already occurred. I'm the Salvation, Diablo, IMF, Into Miami Firm, Florida Shoot Style Wrestling. Get it right. Send me your money. Invest with me. Athletes, you get with me. We'll take wrestling back up to the top. The king of all sports. That's what professional wrestling is supposed to be. And that's what it was in 1900. And that's what we'll take it back to. Talk to you next time.